On a winter morning in 1863, as the icy fog rolled over the banks of the Mississippi, a letter arrived in the small town of Vicksburg that would change the lives of everyone who read it. The words were simple, yet they carried the weight of an entire nation at war. Hidden within those lines was the untold story of courage, betrayal, and sacrifice. Stories that would never appear in history books, yet shaped the destiny of America. Jacob Reynolds, a young clerk with an unremarkable life, had always believed that history belonged to the famous generals and politicians. But as he unfolded that letter, a chain of events began that would draw him into the heart of the Civil War, not on the battlefield, but in the shadows, where secrets were bought, sold, and sometimes paid for with blood. By the time the smoke of war reached his doorstep, Jacob found himself questioning everything he knew about loyalty, honor, and what it truly meant to fight for a country divided. From clandestine meetings in candlelit taverns to daring missions that risked his very life, his journey would reveal the untold struggles of ordinary people who shaped extraordinary history. And yet, amidst the chaos, one question lingered. Could one man's courage truly alter the course of a nation? Shadows over Vicksburg. The town of Vicksburg had always been a place where the river spoke louder than the people. Steamships groaned as they pushed through the muddy waters of the Mississippi, and the warehouses along the banks smelled of tobacco, cotton, and the ever-present tang of river mud. For Jacob Reynolds, the river was both a comfort and a reminder of how small his own life was. He rose each day before dawn, dressed in a plain brown coat, and walked to the small clerk's office where he worked for Mr. Hargrove, a man who believed the only history worth remembering was the money that passed through his ledgers. He filed papers, recorded shipments, and occasionally wrote letters for local merchants who were too busy counting their coins to spell words correctly. But on that winter morning, the routine was broken. A rider had arrived at the office carrying a letter sealed with wax and stamped with an unfamiliar insignia. He took it, hands trembling slightly, not from cold, but from an inexplicable sense of foreboding. As he broke the seal and read the first lines, his heart skipped a beat. The Union's movements will soon determine the fate of this river town. If these letters are intercepted, countless lives will be lost. You, Jacob Reynolds, are the only one who can carry this message safely. Jacob's first thought was disbelief. Who would write to him, a nobody clerk? And yet, the words seemed to pulse on the page, urgent and alive. He folded the letter carefully, slipped it into his coat, and stepped outside into the fog-laden street. By noon, whispers had begun to circulate. Soldiers from both sides moved silently through the town, their eyes scanning faces for loyalty, suspicion, or dissent. Jacob noticed them in the market square, young men with rifles slung over their shoulders, marching past women carrying bundles of firewood. The war had arrived, not with the roar of cannons, but in quiet, deliberate steps. That night, Jacob sat by the flickering light of a single candle, trying to make sense of the letter. Maps spread across the table showed the rivers, the forests, and the roads that crisscrossed the southern states. The words of the letter seemed to echo in his mind. You are the only one who can carry this message safely. He did not yet understand why. He did not yet understand how dangerous it would become. But deep down, Jacob knew one thing. His life was about to change forever. By the following morning, he was meeting a man whose reputation preceded him, Elijah Ward, a Union scout known for moving through enemy territory like a shadow. The Union scout's eyes were sharp, cold, and calculating, Yet there was a flicker of recognition when he saw Jacob. "You're the clerk," he said quietly, glancing around the empty warehouse. "You've got a letter that could cost lives. Do you know what that means?" Jacob nodded slowly, though he had no true idea. "It means," Elijah continued, "that you're part of something bigger than yourself, and if you fail, people die." Jacob swallowed hard, the weight of the responsibility settling on his shoulders. In that moment, he realized that history wasn't just something recorded in books. It was something lived and sometimes survived by ordinary people who dared to step into extraordinary circumstances. The first mission. The following morning, Jacob met Elijah Ward at the edge of Vicksburg, where the river's fog hung low and heavy. The scout's horse snorted in the chill, and Jacob felt the weight of his own apprehension pressing him into the saddle. He had never ridden beyond the town limits, let alone ventured into enemy-held territory. "Elijah," Jacob whispered, "why me? I'm just a clerk. I don't know how to fight or spy or anything." Elijah's eyes were sharp. "You don't need to fight. You need to move unseen. You need to be smart, and most of all, you need to keep this letter safe. That's enough." They rode through narrow dirt roads, past plantations wrapped in a frozen morning mist, past men who nodded politely but whose hands never left their rifles. Jacob realized that war was everywhere, not just on battlefields. It was in the air, in the towns, in the very looks people gave one another. Their destination was a safe house 2 towns downriver. A woman named Martha Caldwell ran it, known to assist Union scouts and escaped slaves. Her home smelled faintly of herbs and smoke, a comforting mix against the winter chill. "Jacob Reynolds?" she asked, her voice calm but authoritative. "I've been expecting you. You carry something important, don't you?" Jacob hesitated, then handed her the letter. It's dangerous," he admitted. Martha nodded. "Danger is part of this war, but courage can change things. Let me guide you." That night, Jacob slept on a cot in the corner of Martha's small kitchen, listening to the sounds of the river and the creaking of the wooden floorboards. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was now a small but vital piece in a much larger puzzle, a puzzle that could decide life and death for hundreds. By dawn, Martha handed Jacob a bundle, new clothing, maps, and a hidden compartment in the saddle to conceal the letter. "Trust no one on the road. They might be soldiers, spies, or worse," she warned. Jacob mounted the horse, feeling the tension tighten like a cord around his chest. Each mile they traveled brought him closer to danger, yet each mile also revealed the resilience of ordinary people who refused to bow to fear. Farmers hid provisions for the fleeing, children carried messages across rivers, and entire towns whispered warnings through coded words. The first true test came at a small bridge guarded by Confederate pickets. Elijah dismounted, leading Jacob into the shadows of the riverbank. "Follow my lead. Stay quiet. One wrong move." Jacob's heart pounded in his chest as they slipped past the sentries, moving like shadows. The letter, wrapped in oilcloth to protect it from rain or river mist, seemed heavier than lead. One misstep could mean capture or worse. By nightfall, they reached a dense forest where Elijah taught Jacob how to read the stars for navigation, how to hide tracks, and how to listen, not just with ears, but with the senses, to the rhythm of life around them. Jacob felt a strange exhilaration. Though terrified, he had never felt so alive. "This is only the beginning," Elijah said, staring into the dark canopy above. "If you survive tonight, you'll see just how much ordinary people carry the weight of this war." Jacob nodded, understanding finally that history wasn't written only by generals or politicians. It was written by people like him, people who moved in the shadows, took risks, and believed in something bigger than themselves. A brush with danger. The next morning, Jacob and Elijah resumed their journey down the winding river roads. The winter sun did little to chase away the fog, and every sound, the snapping of a twig, the rustle of dry leaves, made Jacob flinch. He had never been so acutely aware of the fragility of life. As they approached a small crossroads, Elijah motioned for Jacob to halt. From the edge of the forest, two men appeared, rifles slung carelessly over their shoulders, but their eyes sharp. Rebels, or so it seemed. "Remember what I said," Elijah whispered, pressing a hand to Jacob's shoulder. "Trust no one." The men approached, greeting them in seemingly friendly tones. "Morning, travelers," one said. "Where are you headed?" Jacob's mind raced. One false word, one hesitation, and they could be dead, or worse. Elijah, ever calm, tipped his hat slightly and replied, "Just passing through, trading business." The men's gaze lingered on Jacob. "You're not from around here, are you?" one asked, a hint of suspicion in his voice. Jacob felt a cold sweat form. Elijah nudged him subtly. "Now," he mouthed. Jacob nodded and dismounted, pretending to fumble with the horse's reins. The distraction worked, and in the brief moment of confusion, Elijah kicked a loose branch across the path. The men flinched. Using the opening, they quietly slipped behind the trees, leaving the pickets puzzled. Jacob's hands shook as they moved deeper into the woods. "How did you—" he began, but Elijah cut him off. "Experience," the scout said simply. "In this war, knowledge is as lethal as any rifle. Never underestimate who is watching, and never forget how small mistakes can cost lives." Hours later, they reached a river crossing where Martha had instructed them to wait. Jacob dismounted, exhausted but exhilarated. The river reflected the muted sunlight, and he realized that for all its beauty, it had become a silent witness to countless hidden struggles. Martha met them at the edge, her expression grave. "You've made it this far, but now it gets harder," she said. She handed Jacob another envelope, smaller than the first, but sealed with the same mysterious insignia. "This contains instructions for your next move," she explained. "You're being watched, Jacob. Every step matters." Jacob opened it cautiously, his hands trembling. Inside were names, locations, and notes written in a code he barely understood, but one word jumped out at him: betrayal. Elijah glanced at him sharply. "You see, Jacob, war is not just cannon fire and uniforms. It's lies, it's secrets, and it's people pretending to be friends while they're enemies. The question is, can you tell the difference?" As night fell, Jacob lay in the safe house, staring at the ceiling. He could still hear the river flowing outside, constant and indifferent. He realized that his life had irrevocably changed. No longer was he just a clerk in a quiet town. He was a part of a vast, invisible struggle that would test every ounce of courage, wit, and morality he possessed. The letter burned in his mind. One man's choices, he understood now, could ripple through history in ways no one could predict. And Jacob Reynolds was about to discover just how far those ripples could go. The enemy within. Jacob had grown accustomed to moving in shadows, to whispering instead of speaking, to trusting instincts more than faces. But nothing had prepared him for the encounter that awaited him in the heart of Jackson. It was late evening when he returned to the safe house after delivering a second set of critical instructions. The streets were eerily quiet, the gas lamps flickering against the mist. Something felt wrong. Inside the house, Martha greeted him with a tight smile, but her eyes were strained. "Jacob," she said quietly, "we have a problem. Someone's been watching. Someone knows the network better than we thought." Before he could respond, the door creaked open and a man stepped inside. He was tall, dressed in a Confederate officer's uniform, but there was a calculated calm in his movements, a predator's precision. "Jacob Reynolds," the man said, voice smooth but cold. "I've been expecting you." Jacob's heart pounded. He instinctively reached for the letter hidden in his coat, but remembered Martha's warning, trust no one, not even in plain sight. "Who are you?" Jacob demanded, keeping his voice steady. The man smiled thinly. "Someone who knows your little network well, and someone who can make it all disappear." Panic surged through Jacob, but he forced himself to remain calm. He had learned that survival depended on observation, quick thinking, and courage. Every story, every route, every safe house he had memorized flashed through his mind. "You won't find what you're looking for," Jacob said, stepping back slowly. "This network, it's invisible. You can't destroy what you can't see." The Confederate agent's eyes narrowed. "I admire your spirit, boy, but admiration doesn't save lives. Choices do, and you are about to make a very dangerous one." Jacob's mind raced. He realized that he could either confront the man, risking immediate capture or death, or create a diversion to escape and preserve the intelligence. Drawing on everything Elijah had taught him, he reached for the candle on the table, tipping it over carefully to spill wax across the floor. The agent flinched, cursing, and Jacob seized the moment. He darted toward the back door, vaulting over crates and splintered wood. Martha's muffled shout urged him onward. Heart hammering, he slipped into the alleyways, blending into the night, the letter clutched tightly against his chest. Once safely hidden, Jacob slowed, leaning against a cold brick wall. His chest heaved, his hands trembling, not just from exertion, but from the sudden, acute understanding of the stakes. The war wasn't an abstract series of battles anymore. It was personal. It was immediate. That night, Jacob stared at the Mississippi's dark waters. The river seemed endless, a mirror of the countless choices and dangers that lay ahead. He realized that courage alone was not enough. To survive, to influence history, he would need cunning, alliances, and an unwavering resolve. Above him, the stars were cold and distant, indifferent to the small dramas unfolding on the ground below. But Jacob understood something crucial. Even in the shadows, even when unseen, one person's actions could ripple through history, shaping events far beyond their own understanding. And Jacob Reynolds was just beginning to understand how far those ripples could reach. Ripples in the war. Jacob had learned that the war was fought as much in whispers as on the battlefield. Every message delivered, every route navigated, every coded word carried consequences far beyond what he could see. By mid-February of 1864, he was no longer a timid clerk. He was a crucial link in a vast network operating under constant threat. Martha Caldwell gathered the team in the safe house. Maps of the Mississippi Valley were spread across the table, marked with routes, supply lines, and known Confederate positions. "Union forces are planning a maneuver near Port Gibson," Martha said, pointing to a cluster of dots along the river. "If they advance without knowing about enemy positions, hundreds could die. Jacob, your next mission is critical." Jacob examined the maps. This time, he was not delivering a single letter. He was carrying detailed intelligence on troop movements, supply caches, and fortified positions. "How am I supposed to get through this?" he asked, the weight of responsibility heavy on his shoulders. "You will," Elijah said quietly, because you know what they don't, the paths they cannot see, the shadows they cannot reach. Every decision you make now will ripple outward. Lives depend on it. The journey was grueling. Jacob moved through dense forests, crossed frozen creeks, and navigated swamps that seemed to swallow the world around him. At every turn, he relied on observation, instinct, and the small lessons learned from Martha, Elijah, and the network. On the third night, he reached the edge of Port Gibson. From a hidden vantage point, he observed Confederate encampments and noted their patrol patterns. Each detail, each movement was carefully committed to memory. Jacob realized that the information he carried was not just valuable, it was transformative. It could prevent an ambush, save lives, and give the Union Army an advantage that no cannon or musket could buy. Jacob delivered the intelligence to a Union officer stationed just outside the town. Within hours, troop positions were adjusted, and a planned Confederate attack was thwarted with minimal casualties. Jacob's heart swelled with a mix of exhaustion and pride. For the first time, he saw the tangible impact of his efforts. But the victory was bittersweet. On the journey back, Jacob noticed signs that someone was tracking him. Fresh footprints, a horse startled in the woods, a broken branch that had not been there before, proof that his every movement was being watched. That night, as he hid in the shadows of an abandoned cabin, he understood a harsh truth. The war was never truly won by a single act of courage. Each victory came with risk, each mission with danger, and every life saved carried the shadow of those who might still be lost. Jacob Reynolds, once a simple clerk in a quiet Mississippi town, had become part of something far larger than himself, a silent hand shaping the course of history, moving unseen but leaving ripples that would echo far beyond the banks of the Mississippi. The price of loyalty. Jacob had always believed that courage alone was enough. But by spring of 1864, he was beginning to understand that in war, loyalty came with a cost, sometimes unbearable. One evening, as he returned to the safe house after a long mission delivering troop intelligence, he noticed something amiss. The door, usually locked and secure, was slightly ajar. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. Faces he had come to trust, Samuel Green, Clara Whitfield, even Martha, were gathered, whispering urgently. "Jacob," Martha said, her voice tight, "we have a problem. Someone in the network has been leaking information to the Confederates. We don't know who yet, but we suspect it's one of us." Jacob's stomach sank. Betrayal. The word echoed like a gunshot. Every mission, every risk he had taken could have been compromised. Lives might have been lost because of someone's treachery. Elijah appeared from the shadows, his expression grim. "Jacob, I need you to do something dangerous. You must uncover the traitor. If you fail, the network and hundreds of soldiers could be destroyed." Jacob felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. For the first time, he realized that bravery wasn't enough. Cunning, suspicion, and moral clarity were equally vital. But how could he judge who to trust when everyone had secrets, when every friendly face could conceal an enemy? Over the next several days, Jacob observed his colleagues carefully, noting small inconsistencies, letters misplaced, conversations cut short, unusual routes taken. Every detail was a potential clue. He felt the heavy burden of suspicion pressing on his conscience. One night, he followed Samuel to a secluded riverbank. Hidden behind a thicket, he watched Samuel hand a small packet to a stranger dressed in Confederate gray. The truth hit Jacob like a physical blow. One of their own had betrayed them. He faced a terrible choice: confront Samuel immediately and risk a violent encounter, or report him to Martha and risk losing the element of surprise. Jacob understood that any mistake could cost lives. Choosing the latter, he returned to Martha and relayed what he had witnessed. Together, they orchestrated a plan to protect the network while capturing the traitor. The operation was tense, precise, and fraught with danger. By dawn, Samuel was apprehended, and the leaked information was contained before it could reach enemy hands. Jacob's heart swelled with a mix of exhaustion and pride. For the first time, he saw the tangible impact of his efforts. But the victory was bittersweet. On the journey back, Jacob noticed signs that someone was tracking him. Fresh footprints, a horse startled in the woods, a broken branch that had not been there before, proof that his every movement was being watched. That night, as he hid in the shadows of an abandoned cabin, he understood a harsh truth. The war was never truly won by a single act of courage. Each victory came with risk, each mission with danger, and every life saved carried the shadow of those who might still be lost. Jacob Reynolds, once a simple clerk in a quiet Mississippi town, had become part of something far larger than himself, a silent hand shaping the course of history, moving unseen but leaving ripples that would echo far beyond the banks of the Mississippi.
Siege of Shadows. By late spring of 1864, the Mississippi River had become the lifeblood of military strategy. Union forces were preparing for an advance near Vicksburg, and intelligence from the network was critical to the operation's success. Jacob Reynolds, once a timid clerk, was now at the center of a complex web of information that could determine the fate of hundreds. Martha Caldwell gathered the team. "Jacob, the Union plans to cross near the old plantation roads, but Confederate scouts are watching. Your task is to deliver the coordinates and troop intelligence to General Grant's liaison without being seen. This is the most important mission yet." Jacob studied the maps, tracing paths through the forests and swamps. Every mile would be dangerous. Every decision could mean life or death. Yet a strange calm settled over him. He had faced danger, betrayal, and the unknown. He had survived, and now he would help shape history itself. The journey was grueling. Jacob moved under cover of night, navigating through enemy-held territory, hiding his presence from patrols, and using every skill Elijah had taught him. The letter, containing detailed troop movements and supply positions, was tightly secured in a hidden compartment of his saddle. At dawn, Jacob observed a Confederate outpost from a distance. They were stronger than anticipated, and detection seemed inevitable. But Jacob noticed a narrow path along the riverbank, overgrown with reeds. Quietly, he guided his horse through, slipping past the sentries. His heart raced, but years of small victories and careful observation had prepared him for this moment. Hours later, he arrived at a rendezvous point where a Union officer awaited. The officer examined the intelligence and immediately relayed orders to adjust troop deployments. Within hours, Union forces avoided a potential ambush and gained a strategic advantage in the ongoing maneuvers near Vicksburg. Jacob exhaled, the tension leaving his body in a wave. For the first time, he understood the tangible power of information and how ordinary people, working in silence and shadows, could influence the course of history. Yet the war's shadow was relentless. On his return, Jacob encountered signs of Confederate pursuit, broken branches, footprints, and a distant shout. He realized that safety was temporary and vigilance would always be necessary. That night, hiding along the riverbank, Jacob reflected on his journey. He had started as a clerk, unremarkable and unseen, but the war had changed him. He had faced danger, moral dilemmas, and betrayal. He had carried the weight of responsibility and learned that courage, intelligence, and resilience were inseparable. Jacob Reynolds, once an ordinary man in an ordinary town, had become part of something far greater than himself. He had left ripples in the river of history, silent,
unseen but profoundly influential, and he knew the war was far from over. The weight of history. By summer of 1864, Jacob Reynolds had changed in ways he could never have imagined. The timid clerk who once filed ledgers in Vicksburg had become a man who carried the fate of soldiers, towns, and lives in his hands. Each mission had tested his courage, cunning, and morality. Now he faced the war's ultimate challenge, coordinating a series of intelligence deliveries that could decide the outcome of multiple skirmishes along the Mississippi. Martha Caldwell gathered the network one evening. "Jacob, this is the most dangerous task yet. Confederate forces have grown suspicious, and any misstep could destroy everything. You must deliver these letters personally to 3 different Union units, ensuring they adjust positions before the enemy strikes." Jacob studied the instructions, tracing the routes with practiced precision. Every mile was a gamble, every moment the shadow of potential betrayal loomed. But he had learned to trust his instincts, and he had learned to survive. The first delivery went smoothly. Using river trails and hidden paths, Jacob reached a Union encampment near Natchez, handing over the intelligence that allowed the troops to reposition safely. The second delivery, however, tested him like never before. Confederate scouts ambushed the trail, and Jacob was forced to navigate a narrow swamp under fire, hiding his identity and moving with the silence of a shadow. During the final leg of the mission, Jacob reflected on all he had witnessed: families displaced, towns burned, soldiers lost, and lives saved. The war had demanded sacrifices he could never have imagined. Yet in those moments of peril, he had found strength, purpose, and the ability to shape events in ways most men could not. By nightfall, Jacob reached the final unit. Exhausted, covered in mud, and trembling from adrenaline, he handed over the letters. Officers immediately acted on the intelligence, averting a Confederate ambush and preserving countless lives. As he finally rested along the riverbank, Jacob thought of the Mississippi's flowing waters, endless, indifferent, yet always moving forward. He realized that, like the river, history flowed relentlessly, shaped by countless unseen hands. He had been one of them. The network had endured, allies had survived, the traitor had been contained, and in the quiet shadows of the Mississippi Valley, Jacob understood something profound. Ordinary people, guided by courage, intelligence, and conscience, could leave ripples in history far larger than they ever imagined. He had begun as a clerk, unnoticed and unremarkable, but through trials, danger, and moral choices, he had become part of the story of a nation, unseen yet indelible. And while the war was far from over, Jacob knew he had contributed to shaping its outcome, proving that even one person could alter the course of history.
Ripples that remain. Years later, long after the cannons had fallen silent and the smoke of battle had cleared from the Mississippi Valley, Jacob Reynolds returned to Vicksburg. The town had changed, buildings rebuilt, streets widened, and families who had survived the war rebuilding their lives. Yet the river remained the same, flowing silently, indifferent, and eternal. Jacob walked along the banks, remembering the nights spent hiding in shadows, the whispered messages, the weight of letters that could decide life and death. He thought of Martha Caldwell, Elijah Ward, and the countless others who had risked everything in the unseen struggle. They were ordinary people, yet their actions had rippled outward, influencing events far beyond their understanding. He paused at the spot where he had first encountered the Confederate agent, the place where fear and courage had collided in a lesson he would never forget. The river flowed past, reflecting the sky like a mirror, carrying with it the memory of every mission, every risk, and every life touched by the war.
Jacob understood now that history was not only written by generals and politicians, it was written by people like him, clerk turned courier, shadow mover, invisible hand in the grand tide of conflict. Every choice, every act of courage, every quiet sacrifice had contributed to shaping a nation. He carried no medals, there were no public honors for what he had done, but as he looked at the flowing river, Jacob felt a deep, quiet satisfaction. The war had demanded much, but it had also revealed the capacity for courage and resilience in ordinary hearts. In the years that followed, Jacob lived a modest life, returning to clerical work, but forever changed. He told his story rarely, knowing that some deeds, like ripples in a river, were best felt rather than proclaimed. Yet in his mind and in the silent movements of history, the legacy of his courage endured. The Mississippi continued to flow, carrying the unseen, unrecorded stories of ordinary people who had shaped extraordinary history. And among them, Jacob knew, his own actions, quiet, hidden yet profound, had left ripples that would remain long after the war ended. If you enjoyed following Jacob Reynolds' incredible journey through the shadows of the Civil War, don't forget to hit that like button. Share your thoughts in the comments below. What moment of courage inspired you the most? And if you want more untold historical stories, subscribe and ring the bell to join us on every adventure through history. Every story we uncover is a tribute to the ordinary heroes who shaped our world.